Hi, everybody. Again, my name is Kim Martin. I am a member here at Sidebar. And if you're interested in what Sidebar is, we are a highly vetted professional organization, leadership community that is built on the values of growth, generosity, trust, and we're on a mission to unleash everyone's potential. Our leadership program is designed to drive measurable results across all of our members' entire professional journey from the start, or excuse me, from the start of a new job or promotion, and all the way to moving into perhaps even independent or fractional work. Everything is delivered through an omni-channel platform and custom built for our members. It is a pleasure to introduce two of our members as well. We have Arvita Tripati. She is a product and go-to-market advisor who has launched regulated AI products across health tech, med tech, and biotech. She has been building products for organizations such as Moderna, Gilead, Roche, and also the VA and NHS. And she's also been in the trenches. She's been through those FDA inspections, the SOC 2 scramble, and the board meeting where someone asks why trust infrastructure wasn't in the budget. So she's been in those hard and challenging and perhaps even confrontational conversations. Kimberly Bloomston is the CPO at Sixth Sense, where she leads product strategy, management, and design across the company's AI powered revenue intelligence platform. Kimberly is focused on building smarter, faster, and more connected go to market motions for customers, aligning the product innovation with real world needs of modern revenue teams. She plays in a key role in accelerating Sixth Sense category leadership by unifying product capabilities around Signalverse, AI agents, and intelligent workflows. Kimberly, Arvita, is there anything else you need to add before you want to start to share more about your expertise?
I think that was a wonderful intro, Kimberly.
Agree.
Right.
Let's get started.
Awesome. Okay, well, maybe we should start by just first off defining trust. So, what we mean when we're talking about it is really that evidence and infrastructure that makes somebody confident enough to bet on your product. So, what makes them want to budget for users? What makes them want to um, go for your product over another? Is it something about your compliance posture? Is it something about your reputation? It's not necessarily just about interpersonal relationships. It's not just about the overall like trust in your brand. It's like, what is it that you specifically are building and measuring in your infrastructure that lets someone stake their job on your product? And so, there's a couple of different audiences for this. And there's like, if you're an AI native company and your product is AI, there's the SaaS company where you're accelerated with AI. And then, you've got the other folks where, just AI is behind the curtain and it's running decisions that users don't see, but that folks will talk about. And so, I think of these as like, say, maybe the hospitals of the world. Um, so I think to when I think about this, I um, look at like this health tech company that I was working with, where they had an AI powered monitoring device, and it was technically sound and clinically validated. And while they were initially thinking about selling to insurance companies, they were thinking about things like diagnostic insights. And the insurance companies didn't really care about it. And it wasn't because like the evidence was bad, it was because it was the wrong evidence for them. And they needed cost reduction proof. And so I think when you're looking at, what we mean by trust, it really is in kind of the eye of the beholder. And we'll get into that a little bit later in the presentation. But I think one thing to just remember when you're thinking about trust is it can vary from buyer to buyer. Kimberly?
And when you look at lack of trust, it comes across in a whole host of different ways, and it is independent of any company, AI or not. When we look at enterprise businesses as an example, and you think of trust being missing, that might show up in where your pilots that you're doing for your customers don't end up closing. And so there's a numerous number of reasons that that could occur when you're in the pilot. Sometimes it's lack of results, but sometimes it's lack of visibility and understanding those results. And so it's about tying in what the actual offering is and the value that you're going to create for your customer and then what they realize. And sometimes they just don't see it. Doesn't just stop there, of course, in some of those self-service products. If you oversee or touch a self-service product, when you don't have that trust infrastructure at the heart of everything that you're doing, it takes much longer to get to a paid subscription for these customers as well, because there's not this immediacy and feedback loop where they're getting the value exchange that they expect from that product. And so again, trust is invisible in the background, but sometimes you don't even know that that's what's the heart of the problem that you have there. Consumers, for example, when they're out and using B2C products, when they don't have a trusted experience with their product, their retention drops. You lose that signal from them, and it's hard to get them back into whatever product that you're selling them. That might be a consumer packaged goods, but that could also be software that you're providing them. And when you think about dev tools, if you're building dev tools, prototype to production is another opportunity for you to look at where trust infrastructure might be falling. And again, these are just symptoms, and there's definitely a whole host of different labels that you can put on where your end users are not either getting to paid, so the buyability is not there, or they're not getting to value creation. And those two things themselves, either they're lagging indicators or they're leading indicators that says to you, something's not working. Trust is missing, and I now need to go investigate what that means for me.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. You know, everybody says that they have a problem, but it thinks that it's a different problem, whether it's sales or onboarding. But if you unpack it a little bit, quite often it's just a trust problem at the end. And so in our upcoming book, we've got a composite case study in there where, you know, the company had a better product, but they lost enterprise deals while rebuilding. And every quarter that they deferred, the cost to retrofit doubled. It was, you know, having to deal with more users, more data, more integrations to port over. Whereas, you know, the competitors that invest from day one ended up closing buyers in half the time. And, you know, this is really what the cost of trust debt is. It's years of lost revenue when you have this mismatch of product to market requirements. And so I had this exact pattern from a B2B SaaS company where the data architecture was built for speed to market and not for scalability. And so it was functional for the early adopters, but it lacked the governance, the auditability, and the extensibility required for those larger enterprise deals. And so as we got into sales cycles with top five pharma, they stalled because there were technical gaps that were triggering red flags with IT and procurement. And so it ended up needing to be a $500,000 re-architecture in order to be able to address those enterprise opportunities.
And so as we think about trust, and I think about my job, how many in you, I would love to either see hand raises or something in the chat. How many of you are product people in the room? But you ship a feature and something goes wrong. There's something missing. And ultimately, when you're talking about something like an MVP, the minimal viable product that you put out the door, and you don't add trust to that equation, you end up with a lack of usability, you end up with a lack of buyability, you end up with a lack of adoption of that individual feature. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen that happen throughout my career where I've made those mistakes or team members of mine have made those mistakes. And so when you really look at that and you say, I'm going to defer those trust elements that are going to enable audibility of my feature, you start to pay that interest even more over time because you're not just seeing that that one element isn't there. You're starting to see lack of adoption. You're starting to see lack of outcomes for your end users, and it starts to compound. And so our belief is that trust needs to be at the forefront of the way that you're building products, the way that you're creating those initial MVP experiences for your products. Otherwise, it's going to compound and it's going to hurt and it's going to cost you way, way more in the long run.
Yeah. And so to illustrate this, one company that I worked with, they were launching a pilot in Germany. They had a really modest revenue target and about a 40K marketing budget. And they had this beautiful marketing plan with, maybe about 13, 14 action items. Um, Great specificity on like due dates, deliverables, super clean on paper. But they had nothing in there for GDPR. They had nothing in there for data residency. And like they had skipped all of the trust infrastructure stuff. And so that's when, the trust debt hit, right? That interest. And so you ended up having months of delay addressing those residency requirements as kind of a bolt on mid launch. And so, these are patterns from kind of real life, and it's painful when you defer these, and by the time you notice, there's real users and real money on the line. Whoops. Okay. All right, so we're going to get into the diagnostic now. So, one thing to note out is that there's the total score is going to matter less than the gaps. So we're going to dive into Mentimeter. There should be a link in the chat. You can also go ahead and enter the QR or use the QR code, and we'll go from there.
Let us know if you're having any trouble getting in.
And the direct link to this Mentee survey is in the chat.
Okay, so here we go. Dimension one of this diagnostic is around discovery. So, how do you learn what trust requirements your users or buyers or regulators have? And a lot of teams end up learning this reactively, but some are proactive.
Yeah, when you think about this as a product person, even as a seller, discovery gaps show up so fast when you have multi-stakeholder deals. And, when you think, especially in this B2B world that I live in, many, many deals, when you're trying to close a deal, are multiple buyers. So you have buyer committees popping up, and that's because the CIO has a stake in it. The CFO has a stake in it. It doesn't matter who the actual functional persona is. The reality is that there is, a whole group of people that are playing a pretty substantial role in thinking about this stuff. And so the idea here is to really think about kind of who's your champion in a deal and have they heard of you so far in that deal?
Arvita, Kimberly, I have a question myself.
Just do
In
it.
in B2B, it's not just the buyer that needs to be able to trust that they're buying a product that will solve their problems, help them reach their opportunities, overcome their challenges, whatever. How do you also think about the trust that's needed for the users? Because a lot of times in the B2B world, it's not the buyers that are using, the users are a different group.
100%, right? And so your buying committee, when it comes to these things, actually takes feedback in from those users. And you end up also having this opportunity to create champions within that user community. So you absolutely need to think upfront about not just who's buying the product, but also who are you building for and what are they trying to achieve and what you're doing. And so when you think about discovery, the question mark for everyone as you're filling out this survey is, everything from this reactive approach where you find something when it breaks to actually at the highest end anticipating what those requirements were, not just to Kim's point for the users, but the entire committee of people that need to make this decision need to show up here.
We might need to, for those of you that are on the call, if you could go ahead, there we go. If you could go ahead and respond back.
It was originally showing us the slides, so it wasn't just till now that it let us survey.
Oh, okay. Thank you. It's
So
the first
people
time
may
I'm
want to
using this
try it
tool.
again.
I love all the strategic responses. This is awesome. And I like the reactive ones. Let's be honest about what we're seeing happen, right?
Okay. Let's see. I'm really interested to see how folks answer this one.
Isn't that the worst? When you realize you're missing something because a user is complaining. Deals stall. Yeah, absolutely. All right. So we're getting a lot of feedback here that says that when you build a product, you launch something out there, and all of a sudden you notice something's missing. It's happening in a whole host of different personas that are giving you this feedback. Sometimes it's users, sometimes it's sales, sometimes your deal is just stalling and you're actually seeing it in research or analysis. And this is what we see across the market. When you're building products and discovery, you think you're done, and all of a sudden a trust requirement was missing. Finding it out in a reactive notion isn't great. Some of these are like, I've done the user research in advance, and that's super strategic and thinking upfront, what are the core needs of this solution? How is it going to ensure that the customer fully adopts it? How is it going to be buyable? Remember, you have those multi personas where the CISO might be evaluating things, right? They're doing an audit in that sales cycle and they need to know in advance whether or not those trust features are there. This is great feedback. All right, the next question, and as Arvita said, this is going to be a composite. So not one score matters, it's the composite of all these scores together, and we're going to talk about it more at the end. But the question here is, how are trust capabilities built into your product, right? So the question is, how are you making that trade-off decision and where are you making that? Is it in your architecture? or is it in hot fixes that you're building in after the fact? And so the ask here is to score yourself on a score of 0 to 3, one where audit trails are basically spreadsheets, you're doing compliance as a checklist, explainability, that happens after the fact, or it's a slide deck that you're creating for your salespeople to be able to have the conversation with their customers. The next item is really bolting on that trust. It exists in the product, but it might be a separate code base. It might be a separate release cycle. It might happen from a different team. The third is you ship it with the product automatically. And then the platform level one is you actually have platform trust infrastructure, things like explainability, auditability, observability. You have these things built in at this platform layer, and anytime you build a new app, it inherits it. Nobody ever needs to ask you about it. So we're asking you to rate yourself on those various elements. Oh my goodness, this is 100%. I love this.
That's
I
amazing.
want to
That's
buy your product.
Wow, that is really, really great. So where does your trust infrastructure live right now then? Mhm.
Technically or strategically, Jonah. Sometimes those are the same thing.
Okay.
Mm. I love the idea that people are part of your trust infrastructure. Your organizations are driving a trust infrastructure for your company. That's amazing.
Very cool. Right. Let's move into velocity. So it seems like we've got some fairly mature uh, organizations, which is great. But I'm wondering, what does your team actually end up optimizing for when it's shipping, right? So we've got a variety of different things that folks measure, right? What do they measure when they're building? Are you guys like interrupt driven, where trust work means like pulling folks off of quote unquote real work? Do you have it measured as part of your features? Do you have it like as a separate work stream and separate metrics where it's happening in parallel? Or is it really like super integrated and you optimize for that time to trust? So one of the things with it being maximizing for like adoption velocity is oh, that's really great. Oh, 50-50 interrupt driven and adoption velocity. That'll be interesting. Kind of want to go back and see what it looked like compared to the first slide. So that might be something we do at the towards the end. Um, but are you making these decisions with it being interrupt driven as like more of a staffing and prioritization decision instead of like looking at it from a culture perspective? Or are you, and so that would be more on the interrupt driven. And then if you're like looking at adoption velocity, one thing I'd wonder is around Like, are you tracking feature velocity and calling it adoption velocity? Or are you actually working towards like how quickly someone goes to relying on your product? And so those are two slightly different things. So, okay, broad range of things here, broad range of answers here. Interesting. And so when you're thinking about what happens when the sprint is full, what gets cut? So how do we define fluff?
I love that. That's probably what I would have said too. It's when you're getting real, right? When you finally get to that kind of sprint planning perspective, and there's this incredibly important element that needs to be pulled in. Anything else feels like fluff at that point. Usability design. Oh, I'd love to hear what Me Too features means.
Yeah, non-user value is a tricky one, right? Like, is it, I don't know, because there's all the different stakeholders in that buying committee. And so, like, what are you cutting with that? Or priority features. Okay,
Oh,
interesting. All right, lots of interesting perspectives. Right.
all right. So dimension number 4 of this is perception. So again, when we think about people that are evaluating your product, how are they seeing your ultimate trustworthiness? Remember, in many of these cases, perception is not something that they can ultimately verify. And it's also not something that you just believe about yourself. It's actually kind of the gap between that. Sorry, it's what they can verify, not what they see in yourself. And so again, here, invisible means there's no proof of trust posture. The second would be they claim it, but there's no evidence, right? So you might say something like responsible AI, but there's nothing that actually explains to you what responsible AI means for your specific company or enterprise grade security. But then when you're starting to look through those ISO certifications or whatever certifications are necessary for your business, maybe they're not all there, or there's not a trust center on your website that people can dig into. Proven is really, you have third-party evaluators that are looking at it. There's public docs that you put out there. As everyone knows, GEO is so important, SEO is so important. So it's actually something that you can find if you just go in and ask Claude or GPT. And then the final is differentiating. Trust is ultimately why the buyers are choosing you. They cite it, they tell others about it. You're going to see that in your NPS surveys. You're going to see that when you look at like competitor websites. You're going to see that on G2 if you're a B2B company. And so, how do you rate yourself? Hmm. Love all the differentiating, the honesty and claimed. Sometimes you claim it and you just haven't done the marketing on it yet, right? You haven't actually published things. All right. So the chat question for you is, what proof of trustworthiness can someone find out about your product without having to ask you? So they see some visible proof of trust from you. Where do they find it? How does it show up? Love it. Mm-hmm. Gotta love customer referrals. Whoever put validation metrics, if you want to say aloud or put in the chat what some of those metrics are.
Okay, so moving on, we've got operating altitude. So like where do trust decisions end up getting made? This is around the whole organizational maturity, right? So can you end up uh, having basically having decisions not be founder dependent? Are they one of those things that it ends up being delegated and someone owns it, but it ends up getting escalated all the time? Or do you have robust processes around it? And you've got like playbooks and decision rights, great racy, that sort of thing. Um, or maybe you're more in that systematic mode where good decision making is kind of just built into the culture, and it's one of those things that happens even when leadership isn't in the room. So, kind of the test here is if you went on vacation for 2 weeks, uh, could your team make a trust decision without you? Love that.
Mm-hmm.
Process driven. Yeah, it's interesting with thinking about delegated, where sometimes even though you own the trust function, or even though you own product, you're needing to go ahead and do a lot of consultation uh, with the founder or with that executive. And so it's one of those things where there's maybe there's a new bottleneck sometimes that have been introduced instead of removing one. Um, and yeah, that can get a little bit interesting, those sorts of politics around that. Um, all right, well, let's move on to the word cloud. So yeah, who makes those decisions when leadership is out? Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder how this would vary with different sorts of verticals, right? Being in healthcare, it's probably a little different than, say, some other industries. All right, well, let's start looking at the synthesis portion, right? So, if you want to add up your scores and take a look at then let's look at like where things are high, where things are low. So, um, I think that this is kind of an interesting point. Like, are we when you interview 5 people who have like evaluated your product, what do they say about it? Um, what do how do you build the case for moving to a more mature organization when you're relatively early stage?
Yes, Sharda.
Sorry, what was that?
I was just reading the chat.
Sorry, there is nothing to repeat.
Siri. Oh, now my phone just lit up. Yeah, so here, like, you're really, again, trying to evaluate yourself and put yourself in a category. And the goals of these categories is to help you evaluate what do you need to dig into and where do you need to invest more. That might be in perception, that might be in your operating rhythms, that could be in sort of the culture and the leadership. And so there's opportunities for each of us to figure out where to dive deeper into. If you want to pump forward one side. The goal here is to now turn this around and have a conversation with your leadership team. And so there's kind of 5 key steps for that. Your goal is to have shared language, to have a diagnostic view of kind of where your trust is, particularly as all companies are starting to adopt AI. This language around trust and figuring out how to build that up front and center and build that from everything from discovery all the way to perception and culture is absolutely key. And so the goal is to be able to evaluate where's the opportunity and name that gap across your leadership team. The next element is to be able to connect that to some of the outcomes that you're seeing. So let's say your architecture level is lower. How do you connect that to your revenue, to your churn, to your customer conversion rates? All of those need to become evaluators for you to figure out, is it something I need to do now? And what is the level of effort I should put into this against those business metrics where you're seeing the elements there? And then you need to define that investment, right? So I need to go and interview 5 CISOs to talk to them and understand exactly what needs to be done before the next sprint. That way, you're not taking vague guesses on where your gaps ultimately occur. And then you need to evaluate what's the cost of doing absolutely nothing. It comes back to those connecting to the outcome. So is it going to be that conversion rates continue to drop? Is it going to be that you churn customers later? And then all of this enables you to make those trade-off decisions. So it's going to take X weeks to do this, and it'll pay for itself in X number of quarters. So the goal is to take this idea of trust and the evaluation of trust and start to make strategic decisions in your trade-offs and do it upfront and not at the end of the sprint when you're like, oh crap, this user just gave me some negative feedback and I need to go ahead and build something into this MVP that wasn't already there.
Okay. Let's skip a slide. Okay, there we go. So Monday morning action. So right. So run the 5-question assessment with your team and let everybody score themselves independently and compare. And so I think that the disagreements are sometimes the most interesting points of conversation, and it can be a really great discussion and see where there's mismatches. And it can also be really helpful to, take a look at where your failures from the last year or two have kind of had customer impact, right? Like, did you churn users or did you lose a deal? So we saw some of those things in the earlier word cloud. So, maybe map it to a dimension where something broke, and that's how you can figure out what where your trust debt lives. So now would be awesome to have folks come off of mute and let's have some Q&A. So what surprised folks? Did anybody realize that like all the decisions were going through one person? Or actually, no, we had like some fairly mature organizations, I guess. So was anybody surprised by their perception scores, or what were your highest and lowest dimensions?
I know one of the things that I did. So I joined Sixth Sense as the CPO December 1st. So anyone who's in a similar boat of changing jobs, my heart goes out to you. It's been a fun quarter. But part of that is, when you start somewhere, is really evaluating where's the value creation, where are the challenges, where's the opportunities to grow. And then as part of that, like where the team sits and all of that. And one of the things that shocked me when I joined Sixth Sense was not actually that the architecture didn't support it. It was that there was a gap in some perceptions that existed across the market. And that gap actually was that some of the intelligence that we provide into our product, you have to like find 3 clicks deep, and it's not readily available to the users. And so it took a long time to go, okay, there's a perception gap. What is driving that perception gap? Because we know that feature exists in the product. And it turns out when we talked to more users and we did more evaluations, that they just had a hard time finding the explainability of when we would provide, say, an intent score to someone. And so for us in particular, it enabled us to say, okay, how do we rework our roadmap to not just address that, but make sure that anything we build from here on forward is built where perception is front and center and the value creation is as easy as possible for the end user to see how did we come to this score, what actually built into it, so that they can then take the appropriate next item.
Yeah, the what you're saying about perception, it reminds me of this time when I was working with a company where like independent physicians were like super enthusiastic, and they just like prescribed our devices like we were so happy about it. It was just so easily. They could control all the patient interaction and manage the data flow, and they had enough context to verify that what the product was delivering was actually, trustworthy. And they loved it, right? But those were independent physicians. But when we were trying to go to academic clinicians, it was a completely opposite sort of reception there, where they were worried about their patients flooding their practices with data that they hadn't asked for and that they weren't going to get, that they weren't going to monitor, that they had liability exposure that they couldn't quantify. And so it was like the same product, same FDA clearance, but there was like this interesting dichotomy in trust perception, split by practice type. And so each evaluator was, taking a look at trustworthiness from a much different perspective. So, yeah, that was a time when I really saw this perception score be something that differed by audience dramatically.
All right, so I think we have a one pager to leave behind, right?
Uh, yeah, I think so. So I'll get that to Kim to for us to send out a little bit later.
In addition, oh, it looks like Jonah has a question. I'm curious if anyone else, actually, Jonah, do you want to get off?
Yeah, I was just about to just bring this up because I'm seeing this a lot more often is with companies now relying on sort of the frontier models with like OpenAI, Anthropic, Gemini to power their platforms from is anybody else seeing this sort of erode trust as there's a fear of that happening with, what is happening to my information and my data if it's being powered, especially with like the OpenAI movement, like that was a big, we saw how many millions of people flip off of OpenAI recently. So just wondering if anybody else is seeing that or how that's being scored with others. So
I'm happy to go first and then others can chime in. I have absolutely seen that in so many different factors, not just externally, but often internally with your legal team as well, or our legal team as well. But we've had to actually start to update our contracts to allow for this. And that's been very true with, let's say, Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies who are have been fine for AI in the past as it relates to predictive models, but less comfortable today with LLMs and the potential exposure of that data on the frontier models being accessible outside of their four walls. And so certainly seeing that come up. And this is where I think as you build in your own trust infrastructure, how are you, if you're leveraging these models, exposing that to your end customers, but then also putting guardrails around where the accessibility is on each data element within the model itself. And if it is accessible of that data, what have you done to anonymize that data set so it doesn't tie back to that individual company, customer, user, et cetera? And so this is certainly a big topic of conversation that I'm running into, but would love to hear from anyone else if you guys are experiencing similar. Quiet group.
well, thank you. That was, I know it's a super hot topic and
It is.
I'm hearing it every 5 minutes with people. So
Me too.
yeah,
Me too. I'd love to chat with you more about it and,
yeah, for sure.
learn from you and, share how I'm thinking about that from a privacy perspective in particular, as well as security. Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. We really appreciate you joining us. As Arvita mentioned, the two of us have worked together to co-author a book, and the book is going to not just take you through the importance of trust and what trust means to a business, but it also enables you to do a pretty deep evaluation of where your business stands and give you guidelines and workbooks on how to address those things including some templates to make your life easier as you're building products that are important for trusted end users, whether that's on the consumer side or on the buy side. So really excited to be publishing that in the near term, and look forward to your readership and feedback.
Thank you so much, Kimberly and Arvita. Thank you for sharing your expertise. Everybody, thank you for joining us today for this sidebar session. We appreciate you. We appreciate your attention. I find that attention is perhaps one of the most valuable things that we can give now. So hope you all have a wonderful day and stay safe and warm out there.
And happy
Thank you all.
Women's History Month for all the ladies on the call.
Thank you, Kimberly.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.